Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, David Icke. We're talking about what is going on right now with social media, the censorship, the data mining, the data harvesting, all of it used against you. And that's the problem when you let just a few control something so powerful like Google, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube and everything else that is out there. And David, you brought up one of the most amazing points of all, which is the media control the headlines. Google, Facebook, and Silicon Valley control the narrative. They are praying for a natural disaster. They're praying for something right now to launch into the media to overshadow this, which is what Margaret Thatcher was talking about. And you can see this playing out right in front of us. I can only imagine. And you know what they have right now? They've got something already preordained. It's already sitting there. It's simmering. And that's North Korea. And Trump and Kim Fatty Fat sitting down for this this global summit on what's going on in the Korean Peninsula. So you can see that they cannot wait for this to happen.
Well, the thing is, the symbol is of the stage magician. They're not really producing miracles. They're producing perceptual diversions. So when they're doing the trick with their left hand, you want the audience looking at your right hand. And it's all about focusing attention. This is where we are. You focus attention on what you want people to focus on, so that they withdraw their attention on that which you don't want them to focus on. And you've just described that very accurately. And you know, this whole thing with North Korea, I mean, it just brings us into the another area of this whole hoax, which is Donald Trump. And the way the alternative media, not all of it, but great chunks of it, particularly in America, were caught in the Trump hoax is breathtaking. And we've now gone full circle this very week, whereby alternative media operations, many of which came into existence in the wake of the lies about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to justify a catastrophic invasion and the ongoing catastrophe that's come from that in the Middle East, and others that were created earlier, where in that period they were talking about this neoconservative group, the Project for the New American Century, which was formed in the 1990s, officially anyway, and included people like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Doug Zakheim. Zakheim, Wolfowitz, and Donald Rumsfeld ran the Pentagon before 9/11 and in the aftermath when they started invading countries. And of course, Dick Cheney would become vice president, in truth, president during the period of Bush of the United States. And they produced a document in September 2000, which was calling for the United States to fight what they called multiple theater wars to regime change a series of countries. And these countries were Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya, Lebanon, North Korea, leading eventually to regime change in China. And these people that were behind that document came to power with Bush a few months later in January of 2001. In that document, it also said that this process of transformation, as they called it, all these regime changes and wars, would be a slow process, quote, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Well, 9 months after they came to power with Bush, a year to the month after they published that document, America had what George Bush called at the time the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century, at 9/11. This was then used as the trigger to start picking off that list. You then have Bush and Tony Blair, who were the front people, that's all they were, the gophers, to justify and lie, in other words, about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to cause the invasion of Iraq based on a lie. You then had them replaced by Barack Obama and a guy called David Cameron, Prime Minister of Britain. And they oversaw the invasion, in truth, on Libya, and the manipulated proxy army, so-called civil war in Syria. So Blair was a Labour Party Prime Minister, Cameron was a Conservative Party Prime Minister, Bush was a Republican, Obama was a Democrat, but the same list of countries from September 2000 went on being ticked off. And then along came Donald Trump. Donald Trump was going to be different. He was going to drain the swamp, a swamp he'd been swimming in all his life, ironically. And he came in and he knew, again, you come back to Cambridge Analytica and all this stuff, which was involved in his campaign. And I'm not saying Hillary Clinton would have been any better. She wouldn't. But I'm talking about how the alternative media was scammed because it wasn't streetwise enough. To get elected, Donald Trump had to get the support of those that were advocates and followers, if you like, of the alternative media narrative. He had to get them. So he goes on the Alex Jones show and does an exclusive interview. And away we went. Donald Trump's the man. He's going to change it. Someone said to me a long time ago, is the president involved? And I said, well, is he president? Yes, well, he's involved then. Not necessarily as someone who is orchestrating, but as one who is serving those that are orchestrating. Otherwise, he wouldn't be president. You need staggering amounts of money in America now just to run, to get the nomination of your own party, never mind actually run for the presidency itself. Who comes up with that money? Those that serve the hidden hand, because they want the president that's going to run the country and indeed, in terms of the United States, have a massive global impact in the image of what this hidden hand wants. So this is a real big thing I suggest that people should remember. One of the greatest forms of perceptual control is telling people what they want to hear. When people are telling you what you want to hear, you should question and research that even more closely than people telling you what you don't want to hear. Because psychologically, when you're telling people what they want to hear, you're halfway there. Because the person you're communicating with wants what you're saying to be true. When people like me come out and say things that people don't want to hear, well, there is that immediate resistance because people don't want it to be true. So they are much more open to being persuaded that it's not because they don't want it to be. The opposite is the case when you're telling people what they want to hear. And what Trump did was tell this constituency of people questioning the narrative, questioning the system, what it wants to hear. And it worked. And some parts of the alternative media were almost frothing at the mouth in support of him. And as I said at the time, it's a hoax. You're falling for a hoax. And he comes to power. And I put a meme on the internet when he was elected, at the point he was elected, which said, key word of the Trump presidency, Iran. Because Iran is on the list. North Korea's on the list, Lebanon's on the list, and therefore you're going to see moves to regime change those countries and to target those countries. And of course, along comes Drain the Swamp Trump. He puts Goldman Sachs in control of economic policy in the form of the Treasury Secretary and others. He now has reached the point. This is where I'm going with this, where this week he has announced that a guy called John Bolton is going to be his national security advisor. John Bolton is one of the most extreme members of what was called the Project for the New American Century, the neocons. They use other organizations now because of the discrediting of the Project for the New American Century because of what it did. But he is the hawk's hawk. He's never seen a country he didn't want to bomb. It's come out now through an Israeli military person that John Bolton was trying to persuade them to bomb Iran. He has called, before he was named as the next national security advisor, for a preemptive strike on North Korea. So this Drain the Swamp Trump, who said as one of his planks of his election campaign, appealing to the alternative media constituency, that he was going to stop having America militarily intervening in other countries. He's now targeting Iran, and you're going to see more of that now. Bolton's here. He's targeting North Korea, targeting these other countries on the list from September 2000. So you've had a Republican president, you've had a Democratic president, and now you've got a Drain the Swamp president, and still, no matter what, the same list of countries is being targeted from September 2000. Why? Because these are here today, come and go political figureheads. The hidden hand is always there, and that's why the same agenda unfolds. And so we've reached the point, just to conclude this point, Jimmy, where the alternative media, much of which came into existence to challenge the neocon agenda, that is now supporting, not as much as in number as it was, but still some, are still supporting a Trump who is now blatantly introducing and continuing the neocon agenda. Talk about an inversion. And I wonder what the point of the existence is of that part of the alternative media that is supporting and promoting Trump still, when it's promoting everything it once railed against and indeed was originally created to oppose. What is the point of its existence when the mainstream media in general is pushing the narrative and the agenda, etc.? And why do we need something calling itself alternative that is simply doing the same? We need real alternative that does not support particular political parties and politicians, but exposes the hoax of the whole system and how it works, and not promoting a political party or a politician, but exposing that they are an irrelevant front for the power that is really pushing events. And there's another point here to make about Trump. when you've got someone who's very malleable like Trump, when you've got someone who's an absolute narcissist like Trump, all you've got to do with narcissists is get them to believe that they made the decision when actually you manipulated them to make it, and they'll do whatever you like. But you can get someone like Trump who I think that there was some genuineness to it, that he did want some kind of coming together with Russia and to not be as antagonistic. He was talking about that in the election campaign. I think it's one of the few things that he was probably genuine about, at least on one level. So what you do the moment he's elected, because you know he's virtually everything you want, as he's proved to be, but you've got to stop and block those things about that person that you don't want. So the moment that he was elected, you had this whole hysteria about Russia ratcheted up massively, because that was putting Trump in a situation where any move to come together with Russia would have the microphones pounding and the fingers pointing. See, he is controlled by Russia. Look, he's coming together with Putin. So you stop through that psychological game. That part of the president you've manipulated into power that you actually don't want to happen. And in Britain now, you've got the leader of the opposition Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, who has a long record of challenging the behaviour of Israel in relation to the Palestinians. So what they're doing now is having this hysteria about Corbyn being anti-Semitic, again coming back to exploiting the horrors that happened to Jewish people in Germany to pursue an agenda of manipulation today. I mean, I cannot think of anything more grotesque if I sat down with a blank sheet of paper for a long time. And because they're accusing him of anti-Semitism, he is not going down the road of criticizing Israel anymore, and he's apologizing to the Zionist lobby for any perceived anti-Semitism in his Labour Party. This is how it's done. It's all a psychological game. And the alternative media in the United States that supported Trump really does need to find a mirror and ask it some questions. Because this is what happens. When you nail your colours to a mass like Trump, and he turns out to be the very antipathy of what he claimed to stand for, you can either be honest with yourself and stand up and say, hey, I got it wrong. This guy is not what he claimed to be, and we're now going to expose him. Then you have credibility, because your point of decision making, your point of action is based on the truth. Okay, we thought what he said was the truth. We see now it's not, so we're going to expose him. But if you're not honest with yourself, and you have an ego which will not be honest with itself, then what you do is you become an apologist for the very thing that you once opposed, because if you're not, you have to face the fact that you've been hoaxed by this guy and those that ran his campaign. And some people don't want to do that, and therefore they go on trying to justify the actions of people they supported, even though they're the very opposite of what they once said they were for and against. And this week, if the appointment of John Bolton does not have this mirror conversation and this reassessment of Trump among these people, then frankly nothing ever will.
The problem that we have with all of this, it going straight back to Facebook, is that they are psychologically profiling and mining this data to combat all of everything that you just said. You have the alternative media, you have the fake news, you have the agenda of the New World Order. I can't think of a better word right now on the fly. But you have all of this, and they have to address all of these issues. Why? Because they have to keep the alternative media in mind. They have to keep that control as well. And then you have the agenda of Washington that needs to play out in the mass media. And I'm asking everybody to just open up your eyes and ears and observe what is really going on here. It's not what you think. It never is. But right now, David, it's playing out. It's playing out in real time.
Yeah, and one of the reasons, well, there's two reasons really. One I've already mentioned, that they're getting so confident that they don't really care if you know or not. And one part of that is our plan is very soon people won't even hear what we're doing exposed anyway, because we'll shut down the communication channels completely. That's where they want to go. But the that's one side of what's happening. But the other side is that when you are manipulating under the radar to transform global society, then at some point that transformation has to break the surface where people can see it. And the closer you get to your end goal, of course, the more will have broken the surface, and so the more can be seen. And that's what we're seeing now. This is why I'm seeing my books from years and years ago read on the television news, in effect, in terms of changes and happenings. It's because this is now coming out from under the radar. It has to at some point, otherwise it's not going to transform human society. And that's what we're seeing. And this combination of we don't care if you know, and soon people won't be able to expose us anyway, and this coming from under the radar, this combination is now really putting it in people's faces, or in people's Facebook, more like. Now, this is what we're seeing. And we're going to see more and more and more of it. And this is why there's such a war on freedom of speech, to stop people pointing out that this is what's happening.
I wanted to say this, too. On our television series for history last year, I said one thing at the beginning of one of the segments, which was this. And it was before the election was finalized when we had done the taping, so it was before November. But anyway, I said this. No matter who gets elected, and it doesn't matter, and in this case it was Hillary and Donald, but it doesn't matter who wins. They go into the Oval Office, they sit down, David, and they're organizing their pen holder and the blotter, right, the desk, sitting in the Oval Office, and that phone rings. And it doesn't matter who it is. But that phone rings, and you pick it up, and you get introduced to the boss. And it's never you. And in the case of Donald Trump, who's a very strong-minded individual and proposed a lot of sweeping things and drain the swamp. But I think he was shocked, too, as well, that he picked up that phone, and he's not the dude in power. And that's just the way that it is. And he found out that his hands are completely tied. It doesn't matter with the regime change or Democrat or Republican, and this goes on around the world, too. It's certainly not limited to Washington.
Oh, absolutely not.
No, and so he found out really quickly. And so his constituents, those that brought him into power, are kicking back going, wait a minute, what happened to everything that you had said that you were going to be able to do? It's not coming to pass, and it's not coming to pass, not because of Donald, because he's not the boss, is he?
Yeah, yes, and there is some truth in that. They come into power sometimes with certain intents, and they find that actually they're not the boss. The President of the United States is not the boss. That's why they keep calling him the most powerful man in the world, so that we think that he is the boss. But there are limits to justification of what Donald Trump has done. And, when you are appointing John Bolton, the extremist's extremist, to this position, you don't have to do that if you have backbone. You refuse to appoint him. But he didn't. He has appointed him. So there's a backbone problem for a start, if he does know what's going on. And there is a confirmation that he's a stooge and knows it, if he does know what's going on. And you know, this so-called omnibus spending bill this last few days is a wonderful example of the hidden hand at work. You had this fantastic increase in spending in the American military. And that's another thing about Trump. If you are genuine in saying that you want to withdraw from intervening militarily in other countries, why from the moment he got into office was he pressing for a massive increase in the military budget? Maybe moving it to homeless people in California might have been a better idea. Anyway, what you are looking at with this omnibus spending bill, as has come out, is 2,232 pages, I think it is, that the people who voted it into legislation had never read. Never read. So what does that show you about the so-called political democracy in Washington? It shows you that all those people are voting fodder. They are not there to question. They are not there to challenge. They're not there to represent the public. They're there to vote into reality legislation that suits the agenda. We had a big point in the process of centralization of power in the European Union called the Maastricht Treaty. And one of the great proponents of that treaty, which massively centralized power and diluted the power of nation states in the European Union, he's a man called Kenneth Clark. And he was one of the front promoters of that Maastricht Treaty. He actually admitted in a BBC radio interview he had not actually read it. This is what we're dealing with. And this is what happens. They have 2,232 pages, and they introduce it in a timescale that does not allow the voting politicians the time to read it. And therefore they get into legislation what they want by default. The other thing they do, and again this spending bill is a classic example, is they call it a spending bill and an economic bill, but then they drop other things in there by the way that they fund, and they are funding a very significant increase in the intelligence community's ability to keep surveillance on Americans in this Orwellian unfolding police military state. They dropped it in the spending bill. You know that spending bill that no one read? This is how they do it. And who's behind it? The hidden hand that people never see.